Intense wind and rain from Cristobal slamming parts of Mexico tonight. In about 48 hours, these are the conditions that we'll likely see along parts of the Gulf Coast. The wind will pick up. Rain will be far-reaching, far away from the center. Nearly 40 million people in the cone, which is the area that could see the dangerous weather from the center of Cristobal, but many more on the outlying areas could be impacted as well. We've already seen some evacuations ordered on the Louisiana coast. There's that cone. Remember, that cone tracks the center, not necessarily where all the impacts will go. So Louisiana, we're watching you carefully, but we're also watching Mississippi and Alabama and Florida. I'm Storm Specialist Mark Elliott here with you tonight, along with meteorologist Carl Parker. We're going to go over the very latest information on Cristobal to help you prepare. I want to start off with the very latest. If you're just tuning in, here's the nitty-gritty, what you need to know right now. We have a tropical storm again. Tropical storm Cristobal upgraded, or I guess got those winds organized again earlier today from tropical depression back to tropical storm status. Remember, a couple of days ago, this was a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm before tangling with land. Well, that land interaction is quickly coming to a close. The center now back over the waters of the Gulf of Mexico with a lopsided storm because there's some unfavorable winds on the west side and some very favorable winds for development on the east side, and that's why a lot of that presentation is the way it is, that we've got the showers and storms on that kind of east to northeast side. Moving north now and accelerating a bit at about 13 miles per hour. So we know that the hurricane hunters have been going into the storm, newest leaving the Keesler Air Force Base and then coming down through the center. They're doing that classic alpha pattern. We got a low-level mission here. Some of the latest info is coming in kind of batches, so ignore the most recent times because that data will pop in. But for the most part, in their path so far, they found some tropical storm force winds, and overall they've been kind of right about at that point or just under. So that's the kind of the stuff that we're watching for as this flight continues over the next couple of hours, making those paths through the center, getting that fixed, dropping an instrument collection to get all the latest info from the center, but also all the data from around the storm. And there is an upper level flight going around the outside of the storm as well to sample all of the atmosphere around. All of this really helps the models. It is crucial information that comes back into play. So we'll take from where we're at now and go into the forecast. What should you be expecting in the New Orleans area, in the Mobile area, in Pensacola? Right? These are far outside of the path of the center, but these areas will see rain maybe as early as late Saturday into early Sunday. So far outside the cone and far before the timing of the center point passes, right? This is a disorganized system and a large system at that. So far ahead of the path of the center will be the impacts, the rain and the wind. Yes, there will be a core where that center goes, and there will be impacts with that, which is why we do follow that center, and we'll be following it all the way up through the Midwest, all the way into the middle of the week. There could be a tornado threat, an inland flood threat. We know how high the Mississippi River is, well inland, so these are things that we're watching down the line. But in the short term, near the coast, there are tropical storm warnings that have been issued from central Louisiana all the way back to Pensacola. Remember, you're not in the forecast of the center. You're not in the cone, Pensacola, but you could still have tropical storm force winds, hence the tropical storm warnings that have been issued across the area. There will be a storm surge as well. This is a large system, and even with reasonably bearable winds, tropical storm force winds won't necessarily do the damage to structures themselves, but with a large system, that wind going over the water moves the water quite easily, and so there will be a pileup of the water. Storm surge warnings as well as storm surge watches have been issued, and it is that water rise that is often so damaging. Carl, between the water rise and the prolonged winds, I mean, we are talking about wind gusts to 50 for a while. I think power outages could wind up being one of the big stories with this one as well.
Yeah, you're right about that, and it's such a big, sprawling storm. It's going to have an impact over a very large area of the Gulf Coast, as you mentioned, Mark. But because it is a big storm, we don't think it's going to ramp up very quickly in terms of intensity. It's got a lot of things sort of nagging it, some drier air on the west side of the circulation. There's going to be some shear as well. So the models have been pretty consistent about the idea of keeping that intensity in tropical storm range. It is possible that it does become a hurricane, but it is most likely going to be a tropical storm storm for most of its lifetime. Now, here is the European model forecast, and you see that big sprawling area. Again, as Mark mentioned, all of the weather off to the north and east of that center, so a very asymmetrical storm. Already by Saturday afternoon, we're starting to see that rain come in, and the winds are beginning to brush the coast there in Louisiana. We're going to talk to Mike Seidel in Grand Isle in just a moment. Then we go to 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's really starting to come in at that time. And because of the concave nature of the coastline there in Louisiana and Mississippi, we're going to see a little more surge in that area in particular, as well as the Big Bend there in Florida. Then into 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we've got a solid area of wind and rain coming into Louisiana, as well as Alabama, northwest Florida, all of those coastal spots really getting hammered by this thing. Then it starts to pick up a little bit of speed, makes its way into northern Louisiana into a Monday afternoon, and we've still got some wind and rain there in Louisiana and parts of Mississippi. So let's take a look at the earliest arrival of tropical storm force winds, probably reaching the coast in Louisiana by early morning on Sunday, and then continuing to push into southern Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, northwest Florida through the day on Sunday. So you've got to have your preparations completed before that time. And here's a model forecast, European model, showing you how this wind is going to be coming in. There we go into Saturday evening, 10 o'clock, really starting to pick up there in New Orleans, 35 to 40 miles per hour, continues to step up as we go into Sunday morning, 40 to 50 miles per hour in New Orleans and also in Pensacola. And you've also got, of course, that onshore push there that is driving into that area of the coastline and maximizing that surge potential at the time. Going into Sunday evening, 10 o'clock in the evening, here the center of the circulation is now coming onshore, most likely somewhere around that time. Very strong push of winds in northwest Florida and Alabama, winds gusting 50, 60 miles per hour. So again, that's well away from the center there because this is such a big storm. Those impacts are going to be well outside of that cone. Really important, as Mark mentioned, to not pay attention to just the cone itself because the impacts will extend well to the east. And then here you've got winds going 40 to 50 miles per hour Monday morning in Jackson, Mississippi. Still very strong onshore push along the northern Gulf Coast. And then finally they begin to relent along the coast there as we get into Monday evening. So there's the storm surge forecast, thinking pockets of 3 to 5 feet southeastern Louisiana, but a broader area of 2 to 4. That extends up into Mississippi. And again, as I mentioned, the Big Bend area of northwest Florida, that's an area that is particularly surge prone. So in those spots, that's where we're expecting a really dangerous water level rise, then 1 to 3 feet all the way down along the west coast of Florida and between the Big Bend area and Louisiana. Coastal flooding is also going to be an issue. Could be some overwash there, anywhere from Sandestin on westward into Mobile and westward towards Gulfport and also into the areas around Lake Pontchartrain. And as I mentioned, the impacts from this storm, because it is so large and so right-handed, as we say, because those impacts are well away from the center of circulation, we expect that there's going to be rain just well out to the east, all the way over into northwest Florida. Huge area of 3 to 5 inches of rain along the I-10 corridor, southern Louisiana, Mississippi, and also into northern Florida, and flood alerts in effect there in southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and also into southern parts of Alabama. All right, let's go out to Mike Seidel. He is in Grand Isle in southern parts of Louisiana. And Mike, as we were looking at your shot earlier, noticed that the waves certainly elevated there. Got one night for folks to sort of take it all in, and then the evacuations begin tomorrow.
Exactly, and what we're taking in right now is take a little break from the exact coverage, but look at this sky. You know, it doesn't get much better than this, the tropical sky, but what you're seeing there, it's being lit by the sun. It's already gone down below the horizon. That's the edge of a cirrus shield that's emanating around this huge gyre, which is part of Cristobal. And we're, what, 450 plus miles north of the center, coming off the coast of the Yucatan. And so this edge has come through, and look, all the way down to the west and down the coast here in Grand Isle. This is a barrier island. We're about 2 hours south of New Orleans. Just an incredible sky tonight here on the coast of Louisiana. Well ahead of Cristobal. It's going to take a while before we get into the serious impacts. Those will be more likely on Sunday. Tomorrow night, by this time, we should have some rain. Carl mentioned the surf. It is gradually coming up. They're rolling in. They're breaking a little farther out, but we're still looking at about 3-footers out here. A lot of shrimp boats. You can see the lights on the shrimp boats here off the coast of Louisiana. Tide going out. The key high tides on Sunday, late morning and late evening. So we'll see how that times out with the landfall. Right now, the Hurricane Center track brings the center somewhere near this area. And boy, they're used to tropical weather. Looking back, they average a brush by of a tropical system just a little over every 2 years, and a hurricane direct hit about every 6.2 years. So this is an area that's well versed in tropical storms and hurricanes. The last one was just last year with Barry. Now with Barry, that was a hurricane, Cat 1. Now that pushed the water about halfway between here and the motels and the hotels and the homes. There's a lot of land, a lot of dune, grass, and then there's a berm. So we're not concerned about getting stuck here. In fact, we're the highest part of the island. But evacuations, Carl, kick in mandatory tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. They're also going to shut down the beach. And by the way, Carl, you've been sending out a lot of good stuff about how the water temperatures in the Gulf are running above average. That's the case here. Water right now, 84 degrees. Very delightful.
Yeah, very nice, but a lot of energy in that water and a lot of concern about just how strong this thing is going to get. Mike, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's get back over to Mark right now and talk a little bit more about what we expect the threats to be near the center and then well away from that center. Mark?
Yeah, a lopsided storm as we keep bringing up. So that west side is going to have a distinct cutoff. Houston, will you get into any rain at all? Maybe not. You might be on the high pressure side of this thing the entire time, which means a lot of heat, a lot of humidity, and almost no rain. On the other hand, if New Orleans is right in the crosshairs near that center point, there will be a bunch of wind and rain for you. So here's Houston's forecast. Low to mid 90s right on through the stretch with barely an icon for rain, maybe a few extra high clouds streaming on by. Then we can work our way towards the New Orleans area. Pretty different forecast, right? We're talking about scattered showers and thunderstorms right on through. Wind is going to be a big factor here. We could have fairly consistent wind gusts to 50 plus. So you add rain and that kind of wind long enough, there will be some tree damage. If that tree happens to fall on your home, if that tree happens to fall on your power line down the street, you got a problem, right? So know what to do if you lose power, know where those flashlights are now, right? Start putting that stuff together just in case you need it. A decent amount of rain is in the forecast, especially on the east side of where the center goes. And if that center does kind of slow down and follow the coast a little bit, we're talking 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain. The bullseye here near Biloxi, that's the highest number I've seen in a while. 7 inches on there, Carl. So that's a significant number of rain, and that would be enough to cause some significant problems.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And we are also going to be looking at pretty significant rain in Florida, particularly the northern part of the state. There you see a live look at Tampa. Very nice night, 75 degrees, calm out there for the most part. We're going to see waves of rain coming in over the next several days. And along with that, it's going to be, bouts of thunderstorms and some very gusty winds from time to time. The heaviest of rain is most likely going to be a little farther to the north. So what we're looking at in the Tampa metro is most likely somewhere around 1 to 2 to 3 inches of rainfall in total. But then you get farther north, more up towards Gainesville and certainly around Lake City there, the I-10 and 75 corridor, and then along I-10 into the west back and into Tallahassee. That's where we're talking about getting into 3 to 5 inches of rain. So you can bet that there are going to be some pockets where we see even more than that. There are going to be some real issues with significant flooding in at least some parts of northern Florida. Let's talk a little bit once again about this model forecast and show you how this is going to play out. There you see these waves of rain already starting to come into Florida, going into 2 o'clock in the afternoon there on Saturday. We continue into Sunday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Rain likely stepping up, so it's going to be a washout of a weekend in Bradenton, in Sarasota, in Tampa, on up into Orlando there, Villages, Leesburg, and farther north up into Gainesville as well. A lot of areas looking at a very wet weekend, Mark, in central and northern Florida.
Yeah, and Carlin, to continue that kind of model discussion, we always get those questions, well, how are these forecasts put together? What is the National Hurricane Center looking at? Well, there's lots of global models and hurricane models. Here are a small smattering of them that come into play when you're trying to forecast where the center will go. Pretty good agreement with these major global models at this point that there's going to be a tropical storm going north through the Gulf. Here's the water temperatures. They are likely, warm enough. They're not necessarily bathtub temperature like what you'll get later on in the season, but they're more than enough to support a tropical storm and a tropical system. It's not just that one model. Those models are ensembles, lots of different versions. Here's a look at those different versions of the European model, where you can see it's kind of weighted on that west side, and so our forecast cone takes that into account as well, and there's that spread. Right? That spread on the modeling. As for the forecast of where we go from here for those wind speeds, just about all those models bring us to a decent, strong tropical storm and then interact with land and start to calm that down once again. So none of them, as you noticed, bring it to hurricane strength. I want to take a quick look again in Grand Isle, Louisiana, where that sunset is continuing, that high cirrus cloud associated with that swirl where Cristobal is located, providing quite the backdrop for tonight's sun.
What getting
Days start with the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 81 degrees under fair skies. Tonight, partly cloudy. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, partly cloudy. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
The sun is setting on Grand Isle, Louisiana this evening. What a scene, right? Looks like a painting. Well, you have the perfect atmospheric conditions to get all the colors displayed above because you have the sun setting off to the west with reasonably clear skies, and that cirrus cloud shield, that low cloud deck, or first upper level cloud deck that starts moving in, will be lowering over the next couple of days. That's the outlying cloud cover associated with our approaching tropical storm from Cristobal. So beautiful sight that is not going to look that way over the next couple of days because those clouds will be blocking the setting sun. Tonight was your chance to see it with the clear skies off to the west. I can show you that using the satellite imagery along with the latest stats from our storm. Remember, our setting sun producing the rays this way, and then here comes that cirrus cloud deck, that upper level clouds. Yes, that is associated with this big counterclockwise spin, that big gyre coming out of Central America. Part of that is the cloud cover more directly associated with our tropical storm, and it is indeed a tropical storm again. Tropical storm Cristobal moving north now and faster than this time yesterday. If you were tuning in yesterday during the afternoon, you were hearing me talk about a storm that was barely moving 2, maybe 3 miles per hour through the bulk of the day. Now going north at 13. That's a big difference, and so we're starting to get that acceleration off to the north, and again, it is a tropical storm. 40-mile-per-hour winds now. Yesterday at this time, still a tropical depression. We know that we're getting some new data coming in. The hurricane hunters are in this storm. We've got one plane that's doing loops on the outside of the storm, the outside environment in the upper levels. This is a low-level plane that's trying to find the fix on the center, and that Air Force plane is going to continue to send in data in these chunks as they come through. They get sent back. They go to the National Hurricane Center. In the most recent pass here on that west side, that southwest side, most of the winds have been fairly marginal, well below tropical storm force strength, and that is expected. This is a lopsided storm. If you were to kind of put a line through the quadrants here for our center point, it's the north and the east side that's getting all the action, and almost nothing out on the west side because of some shear in the environment and some drier air. That's going to be part of the story here throughout the life cycle of our storm. That is the east side and far east from the center that'll get most of the action. Look, we're not that far away from the west coast of Florida, starting to see this thunderstorm action approaching. That is tied to the big circulation around our tropical storm. So don't focus just on the track of the center. That's not going to tell you the whole story in this scenario. It is still important to follow the center, and that's what the track does. It shows us what the top wind speeds near that center will be. Current forecast is for a strong tropical storm to approach the Louisiana coastline late on Sunday. Now, that does not tell us when the impacts are going to arrive. They'll arrive much before that, with fairly widespread rain and wind as early as late Saturday, so almost a day before the center gets there. Also important, look how far north that center could hold together. Forecast to still be, a counterclockwise spin and holding its own through the Midwest, over the Mississippi River again, back through the Great Lakes and maybe towards Ontario, where there could, in theory, still be some squally weather, inland flood concerns, tornadic potential, as is often the case with these landfalling tropical systems. Back towards the coastline, tropical storm warnings are up from central Louisiana back to the western side of the Florida Panhandle, again, well outside the center. We also know there's going to be a distinct water rise. That water will be held because of the shape of the land here, so that's an easier time to get a bigger water rise. Storm surge warnings there, otherwise storm surge watches. Also look at the shape of the land here. Storm surge watch, again, that Big Bend of Florida could hold some of that water. Coastal flood alerts starting to come up. Flood watches are in place here, including Grand Isle, including New Orleans, including Baton Rouge, including the Gulfport area. We're watching the rest of southern Mississippi into Mobile, southern Alabama, for that potential for flooding also. And so when you look at the coastal concerns, more in particular with that push of water and with the the rivers not able to exit the same way because the onshore flow stopping that progress, coastal flooding and even some wave action could occur there as well. So Carl, all the impacts are there. It's a large tropical storm. I don't want people to say, oh, it's just a tropical storm. We've seen plenty of problems with tropical storms in the past.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly a big storm, and it's going to have a huge impact, a huge area of impact. One good thing about this system is because it is large, larger systems tend to take a longer time to get more intense. It's the smaller ones you have to worry about in terms of getting very intense very quickly. So this one is not likely to become much stronger than a strong tropical storm, or maybe a low-grade hurricane, but it's not going to be anything more than that. But again, as Mark mentioned, all that weather well away from the center of the circulation, already starting to come into the coast Saturday afternoon. So the winds picking up at that time. We're seeing more and more of an onshore push of water. There you go into Sunday afternoon, really coming onshore at that time. And then even through the day into the evening on Sunday, we've still got an onshore push that continues even into Monday as well. Let's talk about when those tropical storm force winds are going to be moving in and when you need to be ready. The earliest arrival time, the earliest potential arrival time in Grand Isle there along the mouth of the Mississippi will be Saturday afternoon for those sustained tropical storm force winds. Saturday 8 p.m. for areas south of New Orleans, and then coming up through New Orleans and Mobile and Lake Charles, going through the evening on Saturday and into early Sunday morning, and then beyond that up into Mississippi and Louisiana going into late Sunday and Monday. Very strong winds on the east side of that circulation piling up the water, and the result is likely going to be a significant surge in parts of Louisiana and Florida in particular. Much more coming up.
Only at Duluth Trading.
Ooh, it looks like a tropical system, doesn't it? It's got that feel, that kind of car wash or washing machine kind of ambiance where the raindrops are getting pulverized into those little pieces and the visibility goes way down because of the steady rain, but also the very strong winds. Plus, it got all the palm fronds going wild. Portions of Mexico still getting nailed with some heavy rain. Even still tonight, even as rain drove people from their homes, it's still falling as Cristobal slowly churns into the Gulf. Welcome back, everyone. We are staying live with you tonight with hurricane coverage that you can trust. Bring you the latest information on a tropical storm that's going to be moving through the Gulf. It's Tropical Storm Cristobal and heading north on a path towards the United States Gulf Coast. So let's go through what we know right now. And that is that Cristobal is now back to a tropical storm strength. You can see that there are some flood advisories that have been issued across the area because of that surge of water that's going to be falling, plus heavy rainfall. So that rain can't move back into the open waters of the Gulf quite so easily. We also have a tropical storm that is just going to be crawling its way northbound. There's a flood watch that's in place across much of the northern Gulf Coast states. And we're following the latest information for you that there is evacuations that have taken place around the Grand Island area, especially for boaters and campers. And Louisiana wants you to know that there are some COVID-19 test sites that are already being closed. So it's not just business as usual. People are getting ready for this storm to arrive and taking those precautions to get both the buildings ready as well as your regular homes ready as well. Let's go into the lab now. Storm specialist Carl Parker standing by. As Carl, we are following this, this developing and potentially strengthening storm.
Yeah, that's right. And what we're talking about here is a very large circulation. And so for that reason, we're going to see effects that are well away from the center. It's really important to not pay too much attention to the cone in and of itself, because we're going to see rain and wind and surge a long, long way from that cone. And another important part about it being such a large circulation is that larger systems tend to not only weaken more slowly, but they also ramp up a lot more slowly. So we think it's actually going to run out of time to get too intense. Most likely it's going to be a strong tropical storm as it comes on shore. There is some chance that it could be a tad stronger than that, but at this point, that's what it looks like. That's where most of the model guidance has been for the last few days. So right now, 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. It is moving north at 13 miles per hour. Here's the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center, expecting a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm. So, it wouldn't have to be that much stronger to become a hurricane. So that is possible, but at this point, it looks more likely that it's going to be a tropical storm, but it's going to be producing some very serious impacts over a large area. And another thing you notice here, this huge area of dry air across the western part of the Gulf of Mexico, that too is going to be a limiting factor in terms of the intensity. So we watch this very asymmetrical storm, this right-handed storm starting to come in on Saturday, really moving in during the day on Sunday, and then continuing into Monday. So this is what the wind is going to look like. Winds probably 25, 30 miles per hour tomorrow morning in New Orleans, but really stepping up through the day on Saturday, up to 35, 40 into Saturday evening, and getting even stronger by the time we go into Sunday morning. We want to go out to Mike Seidel. He's been reporting from Grand Isle in Louisiana, and Mike already seeing some elevated surf there, and they want everybody to get out of that area by tomorrow morning.
Yes, mandatory evacuation, 6 a.m. tomorrow here in Grand Isle. Meanwhile, Photo Op City, look at the sky tonight. I mean, this is worth the price of admission. And what you see, we're starting to lose that orange edge there. That's the outer band, the cirrus shield, that's rotated in from Cristobal, which is hundreds of miles away. Last check, about 480 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River. And then you see the horizon with the orange, and then the stratus clouds, which were around today. We had one little shower late morning, and that was it. It's been a very dry day. That is really going to change as we get into tomorrow night and especially Sunday, even into Monday morning. Speaking of the surf, this is from early this afternoon, just down the coast a bit at the Grand Isle State Park, and I went out on the pier so you get a sense of the waves rolling into the beaches. These are about 2, maybe 3 footers. That's it. We're a long way away from that swell, and that's going to start rotating in and propagating towards the coast tomorrow. In fact, the National Weather Service marine forecast here for Sunday and Sunday night puts breakers out of here 15 to 20 feet. We'll have continuing coverage. We're on late tonight all weekend. We've got crews up and down the coast in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana.
I had a
.gov.
We continue to believe that the greatest threats will be heavy rainfall and flash flooding, river flooding, with minor to moderate coastal flooding as well due to storm surge.
That water rise could be significant in portions of Louisiana, but also portions of the Gulf Coast far away from the center, like near the Florida Big Bend, for example. Heavy rain, river flooding issues, storm surge, tornado threat, flooding, you name it. It's a tropical system. It's going to bring some of those impacts. Now, the winds might not be as strong as, say, a strong hurricane. It's not forecast to get there. A strong tropical storm has different impacts than a strong hurricane, but they are impacts nonetheless. And with a large tropical storm, a lot of rain, and consistent 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, that's more than enough to knock down trees. That could mean power outages that could be extensive in areas. So just keep that in mind. You need to know what's headed your way. Right now, latest advisory gives us 40-mile-per-hour top wind speeds. Moving north at 13, that pressure has come down a bit today, now back to 998 millibars. Pressure is a proxy for the strength. The lower the pressure goes, the stronger the storm, the more organized that low pressure area is getting. The Hurricane Hunter Air Force, the Hurricane Hunters, the Air Force aircraft are in this storm right now. They are left the northern Gulf Coast earlier this evening, have done one pass through the storm, found a center near there. Now they're doing that path down to the south, and they'll cut through again, that alpha pattern, classic flight formation. Where they are right now, not all that impressive with regards to rain or organization or storms, and thus we wouldn't expect a lot of wind there, and we haven't had a lot of wind. In fact, very little being reported at the moment because there's just not that much going on across that area that they're flying through. That could change as that flight gets back onto the northeast side, where a lot of the action is. All of the big storms are displaced off to the north or east, and that's because of the sheared environment. We've got dry air over here. We have a high amount of shear, at least compared to what's going on the east side. And so you put all that together, and this will be a large and disorganized storm system, all for its history. So yes, it's important to follow the path where this storm goes next, but don't discount what could happen, say, through the Florida Peninsula or Florida Panhandle. You're not going to be in the center. There's almost a zero chance that you will be in the center of this approaching storm, but the impacts are going to be on that east side. It is much more likely that you'll have impacts on the east than the west. Houston, you'll be closer to the center than, say, Tallahassee. Tallahassee, you're going to have more impacts from this storm than Houston will. It's because it's a large and disorganized kind of asymmetrical storm that's going to be making its way through the Gulf. Following the center is important. There are impacts that go along with the center. That means some of the winds near 60 miles per hour will be knocking on the doorstep. Some of the water rise in those favored bays and inlets will be really problematic if you're right along those coasts. And as we go into early next week, even the middle of next week, we'll still have a core before this gets caught up with an approaching cold front and kind of loses all tropical characteristics. There will still be a counterclockwise spin moving through, and that will bring an inland tornado threat and inland rain threat as well. Tropical storm warnings back towards the coast where the wind and rain will be at their worst. So based on the current forecast track, New Orleans is right in the middle of Cristobal's path. There's no sign of tropical troubles here yet. Right now, it is certainly that proverbial calm before the storm. But now is the time to make sure that you are prepared for any damaging winds, for flooding, and maybe more importantly, power outages. The Louisiana coast is under a tropical storm warning and a storm surge warning through the weekend. And Hurricane Katrina in 2005 shined the light on how devastating tropical systems can be in New Orleans. The city has made some drastic improvements to the levee system since Katrina, but the question is always, is it enough?
New Orleans sits close to the hurricane-prone Gulf, surrounded by water and dissected by canals. And worse, much of the city sits below sea level. New Orleans is built in a bowl. Once water comes into the city, it has nowhere to go, trapping residents and making evacuation almost impossible. That can lead to a large loss of life. The Army Corps of Engineers has implemented a risk reduction system, but it is not a risk elimination system. During Katrina, storm surge rushed into the city when flood walls failed, drowning the lower 9th Ward with water up to roofs. Today, it would be different. These walls should stand, but a strong hurricane coming at just the wrong angle can produce storm surge even higher than these massive walls. Water would pour into the city even without a levee failure, and the calculation is a wrong Category 2 hurricane could be enough to do it. As neighborhoods like the lower 9th Ward rebuild behind the flood walls, there's a new and surprising worry. Officials' biggest concern is complacency. The city hasn't seen a large storm since Katrina, and they are worried people will find reasons not to listen to evacuation orders. Residents need to evacuate, but evacuating isn't easy in the Big Easy. One estimate is that it could take 44 hours to get everybody out of New Orleans and to clear the roads.
So that is, of course, residents need to evacuate if they are told to do so. Follow those local warnings and alerts from those officials if and when they are issued. There probably won't be for this one. A strong tropical storm headed towards New Orleans, but there will still be some impacts. You can see the forecast calls for rain, winds up to 50 miles per hour for a fairly extended period of time, and tropical storm warnings are in place. So here's a look at how the European model sees that area of low pressure organizing, going north through the Gulf, approaching the Louisiana coastline Sunday, but the impacts for rain and wind could be there earlier. Still with that rain and wind lasting through Monday, if not Tuesday, as that low moves away. So this is going to be a far-reaching event, a long-lasting event, which is why that 5 to 8 inch rainfall total is not out of the question from Biloxi back through New Orleans. We've got the storm surge warnings on that east side of Louisiana, as well as up through southern portions of southern Mississippi. Storm surge watches far away from there as well. Of course, here's that look at the seawalls and the levees around the New Orleans area. You got the Mississippi River here, you got Lake Pontchartrain, but maybe more importantly, or don't forget that so much of the area is at or below sea level. So it's not just about the water coming in from the water bodies, the lake and the river, but also heavy rain that falls on the city. There's a pump system. That first hour you can get an inch of water out, and then it's a ½ inch for every hour after that.
Your itchy eyes know Weird Earth. Next Sunday night on the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 80 degrees under clear skies. Tonight, partly cloudy. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, partly cloudy. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
Hurricane hunters from Biloxi, Mississippi are wrapping up their flights for the day. On the left, you see one of the WC-130J Super Hercules planes taking off from Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi earlier today. And on the right, that's what it looks like flying inside the tropical storm. Hurricane hunters gathering valuable data from inside the storm, including wind speed, direction, and pressure. Hurricane hunters prepping to fly into Cristobal from Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi, and one of the most deadly parts of a tropical storm or hurricane isn't the wind, it is the storm surge. Hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb joins us now with a look at what kind of surge we could expect from Cristobal.
It has been a very long week in southern Mexico and Central America. Flooding rains that have turned deadly, and now large tropical storm Cristobal is going to make its move across the Gulf of Mexico this weekend, bringing to our coastline and to inland areas a number of wind and especially water impacts. One of them is storm surge. It's saltwater flooding coming onto normally dry ground. One of the reasons we're so vulnerable in the Gulf of Mexico is the shape of the coastline. I mean, look at that concave shape that allows it to behave kind of like a catcher's mitt and captures the water that is pushed northward on the east side of the storm. But even more than that, we have this very wide continental shelf. The distance between the beach and when it finally starts getting deep is very wide. And so when the water is pushed toward the coastline, it's more apt to continue on and go on to normally dry ground. A more narrow continental shelf, we'd be seeing more breaking waves at the coastline. So we're very vulnerable throughout the entire Gulf of Mexico to storm surge. Now, you throw a large tropical storm into the mix, you don't even need a hurricane to produce life-threatening saltwater flooding. Watch how large this system is going to be, and it's going to be lopsided with most of the winds and the water on the east side. Look at that distance between the center of circulation and the west coast of Florida. It's going to be this expansive wind field, a long fetch, pushing the salt water northward into the north central and northeastern Gulf of Mexico. A lot of big waves out in the Gulf, large swells propagating northward, and then when the system gets close to landfall, if the onshore push is timed with high tide, that's when we could have a maximum in storm surge flooding that could exceed that roughly 3-foot threshold where it's life-threatening. Now, because of the large size of the system, we're going to see persistent onshore flow that could create some amount of saltwater flooding all the way from Louisiana down to the southwest coast of Florida. But the areas that we're most concerned about would be southeast Louisiana and portions of the Mississippi coastline and that oh so vulnerable Big Bend area of Florida where the waters are so shallow and it just catches the water with the shape of that coastline. Now, what do you do in the face of these storm surge and coastal flooding hazards? You get out when local officials tell you to go. Alex?
All right, Dr. Knapp, thank you so much. And let's take a look at the latest on this storm. It is a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. You'll notice it is a very, very large system, a huge circulation here that is largely devoid of weather on the west side. But if you go basically from one side of the circulation to the other, you're talking about hundreds of miles there. So when you've got a really large storm like this, they tend not to change very quickly in terms of intensity. That's an important point because it's going to take some time for it to gradually increase in intensity, and if it had more time, it would be more likely that it could reach hurricane status. And it's not going to have that much time. It's going to be moving in on Sunday, and for that reason we think it's probably going to stay a tropical storm. There's still an outside chance that it could reach hurricane, but it looks like it's most likely going to be a strong tropical storm as it comes in. And it's going to be a very right-handed storm, as we say, where all the weather is on the east side of the circulation. You've got all this moist air that's coming up and wrapping into the circulation right in here, and then on the other side you've got drier air. I mean, you see the incredible absence of cloud there in the western Gulf of Mexico. So in some respects, it's almost like what we call a subtropical storm. It's got some sort of non-tropical characteristics, but as more of that moisture wraps in and about that center, it's going to become more and more like a typical tropical entity. But we're still going to see all the weather on the east and northeast side of the circulation and well away from the cone. So it's really important to not pay attention to just the cone. The cone is showing you where the center is going to go, but there's going to be all kinds of impacts that are well away from that center. So, tropical storm warnings now up in southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern parts of Alabama, even into northwest Florida, over towards Sandestin and Pensacola there. And let's talk a little bit about the model forecast. I want to show you how this big sprawling system comes up, and we're really starting to get the brunt of the storm on Sunday morning. Things are going to be stepping up during the day tomorrow. So the winds will be increasing, especially in areas of land that jut out farther south, like southeast Louisiana. We're going to see the winds starting to really step up tomorrow afternoon, but it's going to get stronger and stronger through the evening. By Sunday morning, it's really going to be cranking. And that, by the way, is when we're going to see a high tide. You've got a high tide tomorrow morning and then a high tide on Sunday morning. So that's when you maximize the impact of that potential storm surge. And we're looking for 2 to 4 feet in southeast Louisiana, where you've got that sort of concave nature to the coastline, the very shallow shelf that Dr. Knapp talked about, and then also at very shallow shelf and concave coastline in the Big Bend area of Florida right in there. So those two areas in particular, very, very susceptible to storm surge. Then the system finally does begin to pick up speed Monday into Tuesday, but it's still going to be a flood threat even well inland. There, by the way, your storm surge potential forecast, and we're going to have much more on this dangerous storm and what exactly we expect to see of it. Our live coverage continues in just a moment.
If you are going
Intense wind and rain from Cristobal slamming parts of Mexico tonight, and in about 48 hours there are those conditions coming towards parts of the Gulf Coast as well. Wind rain and a water rise at the coastline. In fact, we have nearly 40 million people that are in the cone. Remember, the cone forecast where the center of the storm is going to go, the area that could see the dangerous weather from the center of Cristobal. But areas far reaching to the east of there will also see the impacts. So you got to pay attention to the impacts, not just the cone. We've already seen some evacuations ordered on the Louisiana coast. Thanks for sticking with us tonight. I'm Storm Specialist Mark Elliott, along with Storm Specialist Carl Parker. You'll be hearing from Carl in the lab in just a bit. We're going to be going over the very latest information on Cristobal to help you prepare so you know what's coming your way. It is this hour that the next advisory comes out from the National Hurricane Center. So you'll get all of the latest information. We'll bring it to you right here as soon as it comes in, usually near the top of the next hour, but it's within this hour that the update will be arriving. You'll see that information right on the screen, and then we'll dissect it for you as well. But as of the latest update that we have, this was the 7 o'clock Central Time advisory. Tropical Storm Cristobal was moving north at 13 miles per hour, top wind speeds of 40. Pressure had come down a little bit through the day at 998 millibars. Generally, the lower that pressure, the stronger and more organized the storm will be. It's a very large storm system and a disorganized storm system at that. If you were to kind of put the quadrants up, go right through our storm center, far and away the action is here on the east side with very little on the west. That is because of a sheared environment off to that west side. There's a little bit more dry air on that west side as well, and I think that kind of regime will continue for the foreseeable future, maybe all the way to landfall with that disorganization. But also look how far away from the center those bands have gotten. That means the Florida Peninsula, Florida Panhandle, you're not going to be in the center, but you're going to have that tropical moisture come through. And we'll talk about just how much rain is anticipated coming up for those areas in just a bit, so stay tuned. Let's get into this storm, because we know the Hurricane Hunter aircraft are circling around. They're going kind of west to east right now. They'll then go north again, back through that center point of the storm. Where they're at now, very little wind. In fact, not much being reported in the past half hour or so. They're right near land, and they're not near any squally weather. I wouldn't anticipate much in the way of surface winds, strong winds. But once they get that turn north again, and especially once that plane starts going through the northeast side of the storm, this map's going to look a little bit different. That's where we'll find those tropical storm force winds, and all that data is going back to the National Hurricane Center. That's where all the squally weather is. You got the thunderstorm action. Cancun is also getting in for another round of thunderstorms, as has been the case basically for the duration of this tropical system. So we're moving north from here, and I think that's what really is the bottom line. The weakening trend we saw for the past couple of days is done. We're going to start to organize over the next 24 to 48 hours, and that brings us to landfall. Landfall somewhere along the northern Gulf Coast. The major global models are suggesting Louisiana as the point for the center, where the center will go. That does tell us something, where the kind of the east side of that center is. That kind of right front quadrant has the worst of the rain generally, the worst of the tornado threat generally. But in this case, because of the shear and the dry air on the west, Houston, you're pretty close to that path. You're not in the path of the center. You might not get a drop of rain, but well east all the way to, say, Tallahassee, there will be very heavy rain. The Florida Peninsula is going to have very heavy rain. So this is a loaded system in that way. The east side is going to be much worse off. Our path then goes all the way up through the Midwest over the next few days, going through Tuesday to Wednesday. There will still be a core of that storm until it gets swept up with a cold front. And so inland flooding and inland tornado threat is also a potential. Can't discount what is going to be happening at the coastline. Tropical storm warnings are up from central Louisiana to the western side of the Florida Panhandle, and that's pretty telling because this part of the world is not in the cone. It is not going to be in the center, but we are expecting tropical storm conditions. So again, I know you've heard me say it several times. Carl's going to say it again. Don't just focus in on the path, on the cone for the center. It's all about impacts and what those impacts will be where you live. So let's go a little bit further into the details on that forecast, including that heavy rain threat. Carl, I think between the rain and the very kind of long duration of gusty winds, we're going to have some flooding. We're also going to have some power outages.
Yeah, no question about that. It's going to be a really tough weekend along a lot of the northern Gulf Coast. And this is a huge system, as Mark has been saying. And an important part about that is that very large systems take a long time to get more intense. A smaller system can get much stronger very quickly. When they're bigger, it takes more time to do that. And that's important because most of the model guidance has been really consistent about keeping this as a tropical storm. Take a look at some of the latest model guidance here for intensity, showing you tropical storm force winds at the peak going into Saturday evening and into Sunday, more towards mid-grade to high tropical storm force, but not reaching hurricane force. That's not to say that this is definitely not going to be a hurricane. We're not saying that. We're just saying it's more likely that it is going to be a tropical storm. So this large lumbering system slowly coming up here. We start to see things going downhill tomorrow afternoon, in particular in Louisiana and southern Mississippi. Continues to get worse through the night going into Saturday night, and then Sunday morning it's going to be peaking. Also, by the way, high tide on Sunday morning along a lot of the northern Gulf Coast, and that's going to mean maximum water level rise on Sunday morning, and then the system rapidly moves up into the north. So when can you expect those tropical storm force winds? Well, most likely they are going to be approaching tomorrow afternoon, and by the time we get into Saturday evening, they're starting to come on shore there in southern Louisiana, and by the time we get into Sunday morning, they're firmly going to be on shore in Louisiana, up into New Orleans, as well as into Mobile. In those areas, those winds are really going to start gusting up to 40, 50 miles per hour. Here's a look at a model forecast showing you how this could play out. So there you see 25 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts in New Orleans. That steps up going into Saturday night, continues to step up by the time we go into Sunday morning, 40 to 50 miles per hour. And again, this is at the time of that high tide. We're seeing that maximum water level rise there along with the push of wind. And so that's when you can expect perhaps that storm surge of 2 to 4 feet in parts of Louisiana and Mississippi, as well as in the Big Bend area of Florida. Well, beaches are closing and evacuations are already underway along areas of the Louisiana coast this evening, and meteorologist Mike Seidel has the latest.
Even though Tropical Storm Cristobal is still about 450 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River, we're starting to see the leading edge of the high clouds, the cirrus shield, that's rotating in here to Grand Isle, Louisiana. There it is. What a sunset this evening here on the Louisiana coast. You can see the orange now lighting up the horizon, and then just above the horizon, behind the stratus clouds, those gray clouds, that's the edge of the cirrus shield. Again, we're a long way from the center of Cristobal. It's going to be sometime later Sunday before that center makes landfall. But today we're starting to see the waves ramp up. This is video shot this afternoon just down the coast at the Grand Isle State Park. I'm out on the pier. You can see the waves rolling in. But this is nothing like we're going to see come Sunday and Sunday night. In fact, the Weather Service in their marine forecast predicting 15 to 20-foot breakers here on the beaches. We're also under a storm surge warning from here off to the mouth of the Mississippi and coastal parts of coastal Mississippi. That's where we could see 3 to 5 feet. Right here we're expecting a 2 to 4 foot surge above where you have typically dry land, and the tropical storm warning, which also includes New Orleans. So we could have wind gusts here, 50, 60, maybe some 70-mile-an-hour gusts with some of the squalls, as Cristobal is scheduled to make landfall here sometime on Sunday evening. It could be right here in Grand Isle. This location, very susceptible and very used to tropical systems. In fact, about every 6.2 years, they take a direct hit from a hurricane.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. And let's go back to Mark now and talk more about the impacts along the northern Gulf Coast. And Mark, as you mentioned earlier, because this is such an asymmetrical storm, it's probably going to be a little breezy in Houston, but that's going to be about it.
Yeah, you know, that they're close to the path of the center, much closer than, say, what you'll be if you're located in the Florida Panhandle or the Florida Peninsula. But it's Florida that'll have much worse impacts than Houston. Houston will probably stay partly cloudy through the duration. New Orleans not so lucky. Pensacola not so lucky. Tallahassee not so lucky. The Big Bend of Florida probably not so lucky either. So again, that east side is where all the action's going to be. Let's break down some of the timing for you, city by city for you. We'll go through the Houston area first because of the lack of of storm potential. Maybe a pop-up storm on a Monday, which is not that different from any other day near the Gulf of Mexico, right? And warm with temperatures in the low to mid 90s. New Orleans, a very different story. The thunderstorm chances really, increase there, along with the wind. For Sunday, low 80s, thunderstorms, wind arriving Monday into Tuesday, still stormy also. That's where we're going to have the worst of the precipitation, 5 to 8 inches in that corridor from New Orleans to Biloxi. As for the winds, the earliest possible arrival time, that's what the the emergency management looks at to say you got to be done preparing by this time. After this, you're on borrowed time, is actually Saturday evening along that Gulf Coast. By Sunday morning, it's even getting inland. You do not want to say be putting up hurricane shutters and trying to nail up plywood or whatever. Once there's tropical storm force winds, it's just too dangerous to be holding up those big boards. That's why this product exists. Now, the more likely time of arrival is later on Sunday, even down towards the coast, but it'll all be raining. Will already be raining by that point, so keep that in mind. Now, Biloxi, Mississippi, one of those places bracing for the potential of feet of storm surge as well as Cristobal comes ashore. Meteorologist Felicia Combs was there earlier today checking on the preparations.
I'm meteorologist Felicia Combs coming to you from Biloxi, Mississippi, specifically in the Small Craft Harbor in Biloxi, actually the oldest harbor in the city. What you see behind me here, those are shrimping boats and fishing boats, and this weekend was supposed to be a very big deal for those boats. It was supposed to be the blessing of the fleet, but that has been postponed right now until next weekend. That officially marks kind of the beginning, the kickoff of shrimping season, but as you'll notice, that's not what we're seeing at all. We're not seeing boats kicking off. We're seeing boats tied down here in the harbor, and as they should be, as now this area is under a tropical storm warning and storm surge warning. Biloxi, in case you don't know, kind of surrounded on 3 sides by water. We've got the Bay of Biloxi, and then we've also got the Gulf of Mexico just past this barrier island that you see here, and that is going to be one of the things that we have to deal with in terms of the possibility for storm surge. Now, Biloxi, absolutely no stranger to flooding. In fact, Hurricane Barry took nearly the same path that's predicted for Cristobal last year and brought quite a bit of flooding to this area. Now, we are going to be on the east side of the storm, and this storm has been a heavily easterly loaded storm. So while Biloxi not in the cone, still going to be feeling those impacts. This is going to be a big rain maker for the Biloxi area and also a big storm surge maker, especially for those low-lying flood-prone parts of the city. So while the weather has been absolutely beautiful for our Friday, changes are coming. I do expect the weather here to begin deteriorating as we head into Saturday night, and then the worst of it will be Sunday and into Sunday night as the storm is approaching. We are going to have that possibility for some tropical storm force winds, but again, the big issues with Cristobal here are going to be the storm surge, inundation possible, and the heavy flooding rains. Back to you.
Thank you, Felicia. That's Felicia Combs broadcasting for us in Biloxi, and we'll check back in with her through the duration of the storm. Now, Carl, you heard her mention that she was going to be watching that storm on the east side, that east-loaded storm, and it makes sense for Biloxi to get some of that weather, but you might be following places much farther east, like the Florida Peninsula, nowhere near the center, but there will be impacts there.
Yeah, this is really a spectacular example of that. And there, by the way, is a live look at Tampa. It's quiet tonight. We expect to see a lot of rain this weekend. It's probably generally going to be about 1 to 2, maybe 3 inches in Tampa, but a lot more in the northern part of the state and up along that I-10 corridor. But we have often talked about the cone and why you don't want to focus on that. I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard people say, well, I'm not in the cone. It really doesn't matter in a lot of cases, and here's the reason why. There's the cone. That cone is just showing you the probability of the center of circulation, and as you go out in time, the model forecast errors increase, and that's why it widens, because you're looking at that impact of that error increasing there. So take a look at that, the cone, relative to the rainfall, the heavy rainfall, and look how far off to the east that is. I mean, that is an incredible distance, well out all along the I-10 corridor from Louisiana on east into Mississippi, Alabama, through northern Florida, and across a lot of northern Florida. So many areas hundreds of miles away from where the center comes on shore are going to be in for a lot of rainfall. Here's a model forecast. You see those waves starting to come in tomorrow, continuing during the day on Saturday, stepping up most likely Saturday night and into Sunday morning. So some bouts of some very heavy rain. And all told, what we're thinking is probably about 3 to 5 inches in general across a lot of northern Florida. So that I-10 75 interchange there, that's Lake City towards Cross City, Tallahassee as well. And by the way, we're going to be looking at coastal flood concerns and certainly some storm surge issues, especially on Sunday morning when the winds are going to be maximizing and we've got a high tide. And then near Apalachicola, 5, 6, maybe 7 inches of rain in total there. So you could very easily be looking at some flooding. You're going to be looking at water coming in from the ocean with that storm surge, with that onshore push of wind, and also water falling on the land, trying to run back out to the ocean, but not being able to do that because you've got an onshore push. So all the way around, it's going to be a very serious flood threat here across northern parts of Florida. Also want to show you that high tide cycle. We talked about that. High tide Saturday morning as well as into Sunday morning, and that's when that storm surge is going to be maximizing. Much more coming up.
Hey.
Weekday mornings on the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 80 degrees under fair skies. Tonight, some passing clouds. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, partly cloudy skies. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy skies. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
I mean, if that doesn't say tropical storm, I don't know what does. This is from Cancun in Mexico, where one of the many batches of thunderstorms were moving on through. It really feels like a tropical storm, right? The raindrops are getting pulverized by the wind into those little tiny pieces of raindrops, so it just is like a curtain of water going by. The palm fronds all going sideways. It was a squally day, no doubt, and there is still some very heavy rain out there across Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula. Unfortunately, there was already some flooding, some evacuations that were required across that area as well. Let's go through some of the latest details for you. Again, this hour we are anticipating the latest update from the National Hurricane Center, but as of the latest advisory, the 7 o'clock advisory, this was the center of our storm just north of the Yucatan, but that's important. It's over the water and moving north at about 13. And that track is set to continue over the next, say, 24 to 48 hours, bringing the path significantly closer to the U.S. And so we can follow that cone. Again, all the actions on that east side. Here's a look at the forecast cone. Going north towards the Louisiana coastline by sometime Sunday. Very important to remember that cone forecasts the center of circulation, not where all the impacts go. You are going to be impacted in Mobile, in Pensacola, in Tallahassee, in Jacksonville, in Tampa. That tropical feed on that east side is headed your way. So you'll have all kinds of rain, you'll have squally conditions, much more so than, say, Houston or even western Louisiana. You might not get that much at all. Even though you're very close to where the center will go, that west side is going to be drier, if not completely dry. And then it is important to follow the center too, especially as that core goes through Louisiana and up through Arkansas. It actually does consolidate a little bit. I think there will be a core of rain that comes into the Midwest. With that, a lot of spin, right? It'll hold some of that spin. It doesn't stop spinning just because it hits land. It loses some of the organization. You won't have as much wind, but you'll have a core of tropical rains and some spin aloft. And that means a tornado threat that'll be going inland. That's something that we'll be watching from Monday into Tuesday, maybe even into Wednesday up near the Great Lakes, and eventually it gets caught up with the front and moves away. back towards the coast. We do have tropical storm warnings that are up. Again, remember, far outside that cone, all the way through Pensacola, the coast areas of the western Florida Panhandle, underneath tropical storm warnings, and back through Mobile to Gulfport to New Orleans and Grand Isle with tropical storm watches towards Abbeville. Notice, again, that west side, you're so close to the center. The west side, that wind coming off the land, drier air, more shear. There's just not going to be as many impacts on that west side. As for the storm surge, you get that big storm and all that wind that's rotating around our low, tapping into all that moisture and sending it up, right? So you got that fetch of water going up and then getting caught by this bowl shape here from the Louisiana to Mississippi coastline. So you can imagine hours of that wind going in towards, say, the New Orleans area and towards Lake Pontchartrain, can't come back out as easily, so the water rise begins. And that's why the storm surge warning has been issued. But also that same shape is here in the Big Bend, and you're going to have north winds moving that water in. And so storm surge watches are also in place from Apalachicola all the way around to the Big Bend, not quite all the way down to, say, Tampa Bay, but through Cedar Key. Talk about not being anywhere near the center. I think that's a great example of how those impacts do really vary when you have an asymmetrical storm like this one. Flash flooding is a potential. Heavy rain. We've got flash flood watches for Mobile and interior Mississippi, flood watches that are up back towards Grand Isle, New Orleans, even into Baton Rouge. Heavy rain could cause some flooding. Then you've got the water rise for the storm surge. You also have the rivers that are trying to leave but can't. And so, a coastal flooding could occur, plus some overwash with some waves. This part of the coastline more infamous for surge than wave action, but there will be some waves on top of that. So coastal flooding is a concern here as well. It's a tropical storm. It brings all those tropical impacts along with it, but it's a large tropical storm, and I think that has some real impacts, Carl, when all is said and done. These big systems, they don't get intense as fast, but they also bring more of those impacts longer because of that large size.
Very long duration storm, Mark. No question about that. And we're going to be looking at winds that are going on basically all weekend along the northern Gulf Coast, even into the early part of next week. And let's take a look at how this is going to play out. So the wind is light tonight, but then as we step forward into tomorrow morning, they're starting to really pick up into the afternoon there. There you go, 10 o'clock in the morning. That, by the way, is when we're going to see a high tide. So we're starting to see some significant water level rises with that flow coming out of the east at that time. Winds gusting up and over tropical storm force, most likely in southern Louisiana. Then tomorrow night, it really starts to crank there in southern Louisiana. Winds 35 to 40 miles per hour in New Orleans, and that's also going to be the case in Pensacola. Then going into Sunday morning, you see the stronger winds starting to penetrate farther inland. Sunday morning, another critical time, another high tide, and you've got this onshore push that is coming into that concave area that Mark talked about, that area of coastline that's sort of C-shaped and can catch more water. You've also got a very shallow continental shelf, and all the way around with that onshore push, that's where we're going to be talking about 3 to 5 feet of storm surge, water level rise above normally dry ground. That's really going to be dangerous. Even into Sunday night, still very strong winds. In fact, the wind's actually getting stronger as the center of circulation is coming up and into the northern part of the Gulf Coast, maybe gusting 50 to 60 miles per hour in Pensacola, well away from that center, several hours drive away from that center. Then here we go into Monday morning. You've still got strong winds on Monday morning. You've still got an onshore push and yet another high tide there. So a long duration event across the northern Gulf Coast. We'll have much more on this storm in just a few minutes.
All right, I brought it
to you.
Gosh, parts of Mexico still struggling with wind, rain, and more from Cristobal. More than 2 feet of rain. It was actually driving people from their homes, and it's still falling through many areas as Cristobal only slowly moves into the Gulf and back north. But some of those impacts are thus headed towards the U.S. coastline. Welcome back. We're staying live with you tonight, tracking Tropical Storm Cristobal as it gains strength in the Gulf of Mexico. It starts organizing again, moving north towards the U.S. Gulf Coast. And so let's go through exactly what we're following right now. That includes kind of the latest stats on our storm. I want to bring in storm specialist Carl Parker. He's in the lab tonight. And Carl, we're watching an organizing storm in the Gulf.
Yeah, that's right. And fortunately, it's not going to be organizing too quickly. It's a very large circulation, and larger storms take a lot of time to ramp up and also to weaken. It's the ones that are really small that can get really strong really fast and also dissipate very, very quickly. So you've got a huge storm here that's really asymmetrical. All the weather is on the east and northeast side of that circulation, and it's just going to run out of time, essentially. If it had more time out over open water, we could be talking about a stronger storm, and it's still possible that it becomes a hurricane, but most of the model guidance has been really consistent about keeping it a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm, as it moves in most likely on Sunday. So right now, a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. It's moving north at 13 miles per hour, about 500 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi. We're going to start to feel the impacts tomorrow, again, because it's a really large storm, and that weather is well away from the center. And then the core the storm is going to be coming in during the day on Sunday, and we're going to be looking at very strong winds developing Saturday night, Sunday morning, and continuing through the day on Sunday. Big push of onshore flow, a lot of heavy rain from the center and on eastward, and not much weather at all on the west side of the circulation. It's pretty amazing. As you go from New Orleans out to the east, you can get all the way into northern Florida, and you're still dealing with this tropical storm. But you go out to the west, to Lake Charles, to Houston, you're not going to be talking about much weather at all. It's going to be a little gusty, and that's probably about it. You will get in on some rain in central Louisiana, but again, a very large circulation here, and you can see also the presence of this dry air indicated by the orange shading. That too is going to be a limiting factor. When you've got a large area of warm and humid air completely surrounding the circulation, makes it easier for thunderstorms to organize about the center. In this case, this dry air is intruding, getting in on the west and southern side of the circulation, making it a little bit harder for the center to become more organized. And without an organized center, you also don't see a storm that rapidly intensifies. So for all of those reasons, we think it's most likely going to be a tropical storm, but it is possible that it does make it to hurricane status. So tropical storm warnings up along the coast. And again, the center likely comes into Louisiana, but impacts well out to the east. So tropical storm warnings all the way up through northwest Florida. You've got this huge area of strong winds on the east side of the storm. And that flow, that easterly and southeasterly flow, is going to be pushing water towards the coast. And that's going to give us that water level rise. And of particular importance to us are the high tide cycles. Those are going to be tomorrow morning and then also on Sunday morning. Storm surge warning in effect, southern Mississippi and southeastern Louisiana. Well, life-threatening storm surge and tropical storm force winds, very real probabilities this weekend along the Gulf Coast, and meteorologist Mike Seidel has the latest from Grand Isle, Louisiana.
We're still about 2 days away from a landfall of Tropical Storm Cristobal. It's now back in the Gulf of Mexico. It's steaming this way, and we expect a landfall sometime Sunday evening or Sunday night, and it could be right here in Grand Isle. This is a barrier island about 2 hours south of New Orleans. No stranger to tropical activity. In fact, on average, about every 2.3 years, they get a brush by from either a hurricane or a tropical storm, and a direct hit from a hurricane about every 6.2 years. So they're used to this stuff. Meanwhile, the surf gradually rolling in. High tides, by the way, Sunday, late morning and late evening. That's the key on the timing of the landfall. And we'll start to see the swell arrive, the waves out ahead of the system tomorrow and tomorrow night. And by Sunday, we could be looking at 15 to 20 footers. Storm surge values predicted here 2 to 4 feet. And there's a tropical storm warning up, of course, for here and also the city of New Orleans. So the major impacts rolling in beginning tomorrow night and certainly through Sunday night and even Monday morning, leftover rain and a strong south wind. Because of that, there is a mandatory evacuation for Grand Isle. That kicks in at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning.
Mike, thank you very much. And let's take a look at the radar right now and the latest on the storm. Again, a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm. You see all of that weather, that bright color there is the very deep cloud, convective cloud, all off to the north and east of that center. Much more coming up.
More. Tropical storm and storm surge watches are now in effect for portions of Louisiana. We continue to believe that the greatest threats will be heavy rainfall and flash flooding, river flooding, with minor to moderate coastal flooding as well due to storm surge. Wind impacts will depend upon the exact track, intensity, and structure of the storm, obviously, but winds up to 60 miles per hour are possible.
And we have some new information to tell you, the latest advisory in from the National Hurricane Center. And we told you that that organization and strengthening trend was going to continue. The latest data confirms that. The National Hurricane Center has been getting data in from the Air Force hurricane hunters as well as from the NOAA aircraft in the vicinity of the storm. So now the top wind speed has been bumped up just a little bit, 45 miles per hour. That is a change. That is up from 40 miles per hour from the last advisory. Again, this is the 11 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock Central, so a little bit before the hour, but they're getting that data out to everybody. We're starting to break it down for you right now. So just in, newest change, 45 miles per hour. The pressure holding steady at 998, but that forward speed has ticked up 1 mile per hour. It was going at 13 miles per hour, now going due north still at 14 miles per hour. So not much different, but every little piece of information that comes in from the hurricane hunters, from the National Hurricane Center, vital data that goes into the forecast models and helps give a better forecast down the line. So that's why we're going through all the ins and outs of these changes. Now we're still 440 miles due south of the mouth of the Mississippi River. If we were to keep a due north path that whole time, that would send us right in towards the New Orleans area by late on Sunday at this current speed. But that's not exactly the forecast track. We're anticipating a slight curl to the west. That said, again, we'll show you the latest cone. There's some wiggle room as to where exactly that center is going to go. Still, kind of a asymmetrical storm. The thunderstorm action is all on the east side of this. There's almost no activity going on across the west. The white line you see here is the path. It was a 60 mile per hour tropical storm before making landfall there in Mexico. Did a little tour of northern Mexico, came through the Yucatan Peninsula, now back out over the Gulf of Mexico and starting to organize again. You can see what's lacking though is a lot of deep convection near that center. It is very asymmetrical. All of the activity, the thunderstorm action is well displaced out here, well away from the center. It's not right in here, at least not yet. There's at least a few banding features that are trying to wrap around that north side. The more of that we see, the more put together a storm we will have. So let's take a look at that latest cone, that latest forecast cone, getting that latest information for you. So sorry for the jumping there. 50 mile per hour storm now, and here we'll run that through you again so you'll get all of the latest information. Just off the coast, still forecast to go to close to 60 miles per hour. But once it starts interacting with land, we'll start to lose some of that wind. The core still forecast to go over southeast Louisiana. Do not forget that this is a large storm. There's almost no action near the center right now. If that trend continues, it's all of this area that will see the worst of the weather, way outside where the center goes. But it is important to follow that center northbound, including through Tuesday, if not Wednesday, into the Midwest and the Great Lakes, because there could be a, say, tornado threat and a inland flood threat that goes along with it. No significant changes to the tropical storm warnings as of this time. Still following central Louisiana and back into the western side of the Florida Panhandle for where the worst of the tropical storm force winds will be. That is, however, well outside of where the center goes. Now, of course, keeping in mind all of this, based on the current forecast track, New Orleans is right there in the crosshairs of Cristobal's path. No sign of tropical troubles there yet by any stretch, but the proverbial calm before the storm. Now is the time to make sure you are prepared for any damaging winds, flooding, and in this case, maybe power outages that last a while. The Louisiana coast under that tropical storm warning, storm surge warnings as well, right on through the weekend. And we know that Hurricane Katrina in 2005 shined the light on how devastating a tropical system can be for New Orleans. The city has made drastic improvements to its levee system since Katrina, but the question is always, is it enough?
New Orleans sits close to the hurricane-prone Gulf, surrounded by water and dissected by canals. And worse, much of the city sits below sea level. New Orleans is built in a bowl. Once water comes into the city, it has nowhere to go, trapping residents and making evacuation almost impossible. That can lead to a large loss of life. The Army Corps of Engineers has implemented a risk reduction system, but it is not a risk elimination system. During Katrina, storm surge rushed into the city when flood walls failed, drowning the lower 9th Ward with water up to roofs. Today, it would be different. These walls should stand, but a strong hurricane coming at just the wrong angle can produce storm surge even higher than these massive walls. Water would pour into the city even without a levee failure, and the calculation is a wrong Category 2 hurricane could be enough to do it. As neighborhoods like the lower 9th Ward rebuild behind the flood walls, there's a new and surprising worry. Officials' biggest concern is complacency. The city hasn't seen a large storm since Katrina, and they are worried people will find reasons not to listen to evacuation orders. Residents need to evacuate, but evacuating isn't easy in the Big Easy. One estimate is that it could take 44 hours to get everybody out of New Orleans and to clear the roads.
Of course, there probably won't be widespread evacuations, at least into New Orleans. We've heard of some, depending on what you live in, near, say, Grand Isle and right along the mouth of the Mississippi. However, New Orleans is expecting some squally weather, increased wind, increased rain. You've got a tropical storm warning that's been put in place that not only New Orleans, but of course New Orleans is included in that. Here's a look at the latest European model, keeping that northward motion through Sunday morning, then a bit of a jog westbound. So you wind up keeping that onshore flow for quite a while, wind and rain that could cause power outages.
Listen. Better days start with the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 79 degrees under fair skies. Tonight, some passing clouds. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, partly cloudy skies. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy skies. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
All right, check this out. This is wind and rain lashing Cancun, Mexico. And you might be thinking, well, wow, is that what this storm looks like in Mexico? And the answer is yes and no. To some extent, that is the storm, but in other ways it's not. And let me explain. We had a round of thunderstorms that came through Cancun. And generally speaking, when you've got a tropical system, the winds are much stronger aloft, off the surface of the earth. And so when you get thunderstorms that come through, what they'll do is they'll bring some of that stronger wind aloft down to the ground. So generally speaking, you find the strongest winds in these bands of thunderstorms that come through. So certainly it was pretty bad as that came through, but that was not likely what they saw for a significant part of the day. However, we do expect the storm to get more organized. It's going to get stronger. And one of the worst parts of the storm is going to be the storm surge, we think, along the northern Gulf Coast because it's a very large circulation. And hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb joins us now with a look at what kinds of surge we could expect from Cristobal.
It has been a very long week in southern Mexico and Central America. Flooding rains that have turned deadly, and now large tropical storm Cristobal is going to make its move across the Gulf of Mexico this weekend, bringing to our coastline and to inland areas a number of wind and especially water impacts. One of them is storm surge. It's saltwater flooding coming onto normally dry ground. One of the reasons we're so vulnerable in the Gulf of Mexico is the shape of the coastline. I mean, look at that concave shape that allows it to behave kind of like a catcher's mitt and captures the water that is pushed northward on the east side of the storm. But even more than that, we have this very wide continental shelf. The distance between the beach and when it finally starts getting deep is very wide. And so when the water is pushed toward the coastline, it's more apt to continue on and go on to normally dry ground. A more narrow continental shelf, we'd be seeing more breaking waves at the coastline. So we're very vulnerable throughout the entire Gulf of Mexico to storm surge. Now, you throw a large tropical storm into the mix, you don't even need a hurricane to produce life-threatening saltwater flooding. Watch how large this system is going to be, and it's going to be lopsided with most of the winds and the water on the east side. Look at that distance between the center of circulation and the west coast of Florida. It's going to be this expansive wind field, a long fetch, pushing the salt water northward into the north central and northeastern Gulf of Mexico. A lot of big waves out in the Gulf, large swells propagating northward, and then when the system gets close to landfall, if the onshore push is timed with high tide, that's when we could have a maximum in storm surge flooding that could exceed that roughly 3-foot threshold where it's life-threatening. Now, because of the large size of the system, we're going to see persistent onshore flow that could create some amount of saltwater flooding all the way from Louisiana down to the southwest coast of Florida. But the areas that we're most concerned about would be southeast Louisiana and portions of the Mississippi coastline and that oh so vulnerable Big Bend area of Florida where the waters are so shallow and it just catches the water with the shape of that coastline. Now, what do you do in the face of these storm surge and coastal flooding hazards? You get out when local officials tell you to go.
All right, Dr. Rick Knabb, thank you so much. And we have the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center as of 11 p.m. comes in a little bit earlier, 11 Eastern, 10 Central. Now a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm, so it is slowly strengthening and also moving a little bit more quickly north at 14 miles per hour, now 440 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River. We think the impacts are going to be being felt tomorrow, certainly along the southern part of Louisiana, and then it's going to just continue to get worse into tomorrow evening and certainly so into Sunday morning. This is the latest forecast track and intensities from the National Hurricane Center, and you see the storm getting up to strong tropical storm intensity, and the models have been pretty consistent on that point. And I'll explain why here in just a second. So we think it's most likely going to be not a hurricane, but a strong tropical storm, but a very large storm. And the impacts are going to be felt well away from that center all across the northern Gulf Coast into Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. So a lot of people being affected by this storm over the next several days. Here is a part of what Dr. Knabb was talking about, an absolutely enormous circulation covering a huge area of the Gulf of Mexico. And you see all this weather extending from the center of circulation out to the north here and out to the east. And that is going to be the structure of this storm as it comes up and into the northern Gulf Coast. So we expect that weather to be well away from the center. Now, another thing that you see here is this dry air, that orange color, wrapping in on the west side of the circulation, and some of that air comes in underneath the circulation and gets in towards the center of the circulation. That too is going to bother the system a little bit when you've got warm and humid air wrapped completely around a circulation. Makes it a lot easier for thunderstorms to form about that center and a lot easier for the storm to become more organized and get stronger more quickly. When you've got some dry air infiltrating, that process takes a lot longer, and that's another part of the reason why we think it is most likely going to top out as a tropical storm. But don't think that it's not going to be a threat. It certainly is going to be a threat because it is such a large storm. We've got tropical storm warnings in effect, and storm surge is also going to be an enormous issue because of the nature of the coastline there, because you've got a very shallow continental shelf, and because it is a large circulation that's going to be coming up through several high tide cycles, most notably starting tomorrow, but Sunday morning is when those winds are going to maximize along with the high tide cycle. We're going to have much more on Cristobal coming up in just a few minutes.
Your itchy eyes know
Oxy Boosted and Febreze.
Intense wind, rain, and more from Cristobal slamming parts of Mexico tonight. In about 48 hours, these kinds of conditions are going to be moving north into parts of the U.S. Gulf Coast. We know that there's nearly 40 million people in the cone, but that's not the only area that could see dangerous weather from this tropical storm. There have been evacuations ordered on portions of the Louisiana coast, and, well, if you're in places like New Orleans, you need to be preparing. Houston, a close call. That west side will probably be much quieter. And then here's a look at the latest path. We're going to dissect what has changed from this and what hasn't coming up with the latest advisory now in from the National Hurricane Center. Thanks for sticking with us tonight. I'm Storm Specialist Mark Elliott. You'll also see Storm Specialist Carl Parker. He's in the lab, and we're going to be going over the very latest information on Cristobal to keep you prepared from this storm, and really so you know what kind of impacts are coming your way. So you heard me mention it, that latest advisory is in. The 11 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock Central advisory in from the National Hurricane Center. Let's go through, in case you're just tuning in, what has changed as of this latest advisory. One of the bigger changes is the strength of the wind. Now up to 45 miles per hour again. Earlier today it was at 40 miles per hour. Not a huge change, but it is indeed a change. It shows us that we've got some organization. There have been both NOAA aircraft and Hurricane Air Force aircraft in this storm and around that outside area, surveying the environment, getting that data back into the models, and getting real-time measurements of the wind. They helped confirm that 45 mile per hour wind speed. The pressure holding steady, the movement still north, but now just a little bit faster, going north at 14 miles per hour. So with that, we're about 440 miles due south of the mouth of the Mississippi, and still all the action, the thunderstorm activity is on that east side. There is some shear in the environment here, different wind directions with height, preventing an easy time to get those thunderstorms to wrap all the way around. But what you can see happening is at least some blow up of thunderstorms there on the north edge. We'll see if that can get right around the center and start hinting at some more robust organization and maybe some intensification to the winds. This is a large storm. Look how sprawled out that cloud shield is from Fort Myers all the way back to the center of the storm. We've got some of that cloud shield spreading out. These big storms don't usually intensify very quickly. They take a long time to spin up and a long time to spin down. So that means inland impacts down the road, because again, there will be a long time for this thing to spin down, to stop spinning. Let's take a look at that latest forecast, the path of the center, not the path of the impacts, but the path of the center. We keep saying that because there's going to be all kinds of rain on that east edge. So, you could argue just as much rain in Mobile and Pensacola and maybe all the way to Jacksonville as there will be in New Orleans to Biloxi, much closer to the center of the storm. But the Houston area is just as close to the cone as Mobile, more or less. You might not see a drop of rain at all in Houston. This is going to be an east side. So that's why we're looking at the center. It is east of the center where all the impacts will be. Forecast still calls for a 60 mile per hour, so a strong tropical storm in the northern Gulf, then making landfall sometime late Sunday, continuing to move inland, and it may even organize a little bit, a more organized kind of ball of shower and thunderstorm action after landfall, kind of bringing all the bands together, and that includes going inland back over the Mississippi River again, which is still in flood stage to the north here, so more rain there, not a good thing. And with that spin continuing, a tornado threat that will likely go pretty far inland. These tropical systems often have a lot of shear, a lot of spin, and although shear is bad, as I mentioned, on that west side of the storm for organization for the storms in the tropics, we know shear is actually really good for a thunderstorm and for tornado potential. So that probability increases even inland. So tropical storm warnings are up over the inland areas, and Carl, these storm surge warnings continue across southeast Louisiana into Mississippi as well, not to mention the storm surge watches for the Big Bend of Florida and the rest of southern and eastern Louisiana.
Yeah, such a large circulation, and that's a big part of why we're going to be looking at a significant surge threat across the northern Gulf Coast. And at this point, it looks like it's most likely going to be a tropical storm. We can't completely rule out it getting a little bit stronger, perhaps becoming a hurricane, but the model guidance has been very consistent on this point, and it's a really large circulation. It's harder for large circulations to ramp up quickly. It's also hard for them to weaken very quickly, so it's going to be in our hair for quite some time. It's going to be a long duration event that starts tomorrow, continues through Sunday, continues into Monday, doesn't really wind down until Tuesday along the northern Gulf Coast. There's the model guidance showing you the intensity forecast there, topping out at mid-grade to high-grade tropical storm. But I want you to notice the size of this wind field. It is enormous, a huge area of strong winds, and that's what's going to help to pile up the water as it gets closer to the coast. So there we're looking at tomorrow afternoon. The winds are really starting to pick up especially in southern Louisiana, those areas of land that jut out into the Gulf. Then by Sunday morning, it is going to be cranking, and we're going to be looking at a high tide cycle on Sunday morning around the middle of the morning, right as the very strong winds are coming in to that concave nature of the coastline there, and that's why we're going to be maximizing the storm surge threat on Sunday morning. Certainly tomorrow morning is going to be a concern. The winds will be picking up, and so we will see some water level rises, but I think Sunday morning is when it's going to be peaking there, and it may continue into Monday morning as well with yet another high tide cycle. So here's a look at the arrival of the tropical storm force winds. And obviously, by this time, you want to have all your preparations completed. We think they're going to start to come in overnight tomorrow night into early Sunday morning. Through the morning on Sunday, they'll continue to move up through New Orleans, through Mobile, and then through Sunday, they'll continue to press up into parts of southern Louisiana and also into Mississippi. So here's what that looks like more specifically. Winds pretty light right now, but starting to pick up tomorrow morning. Then we go into the afternoon, 35, 40 miles per hour in New Orleans there. Then that's into Saturday evening. Watch what happens then by Sunday morning. And so we're really looking at very strong winds Sunday morning, 40 to 50 miles per hour. And you're seeing this very strong onshore push coming into that coastline there. And that's why there is this concern for a 3 to 5 foot water level rise, parts of Louisiana and also in Mississippi. That's where we really have to be concerned. And beaches are closing and evacuations are already underway along areas of the Louisiana coast this evening. Meteorologist Mike Seidel has the latest.
Even though Tropical Storm Cristobal is still about 450 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River, we're starting to see the leading edge of the high clouds, the cirrus shield, that's rotating in here to Grand Isle, Louisiana. There it is. What a sunset this evening here on the Louisiana coast. You can see the orange now lighting up the horizon, and then just above the horizon, behind the stratus clouds, those gray clouds, that's the edge of the cirrus shield. Again, we're a long way from the center of Cristobal. It's going to be sometime later Sunday before that center makes landfall. But today we're starting to see the waves ramp up. This is video shot this afternoon just down the coast at the Grand Isle State Park. I'm out on the pier. You can see the waves rolling in. But this is nothing like we're going to see come Sunday and Sunday night. In fact, the Weather Service in their marine forecast predicting 15 to 20 foot breakers here on the beaches. We're also under a storm surge warning from here off to the mouth of the Mississippi and coastal parts of coastal Mississippi. That's where we could see 3 to 5 feet. Right here we're expecting a 2 to 4 foot surge above where you have typically dry land, and the tropical storm warning, which also includes New Orleans. So we could have wind gusts here, 50, 60, maybe some 70-mile-an-hour gusts of some of the squalls, as Cristobal is scheduled to make landfall here sometime on Sunday evening. It could be right here in Grand Isle. This location, very susceptible and very used to tropical systems. In fact, about every 6.2 years, they take a direct hit from a hurricane.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. And as we've been talking about, a really large circulation. And Mark, you know, the center of the circulation coming in near New Orleans, 300 miles to the east in Apalachicola, we're going to be looking at serious rainfall and surge impacts. 300 miles to the west in Houston, probably not going to be too bad of a day.
Yeah, you know, if anything, it might be even hotter than it otherwise would be, because there's going to be a little bit of that sinking dry air on that west side of the storm. So a place like Houston, certainly interior Texas is really going to be baking. It is going to be extremely hot. Houston in the low 80s, New Orleans in the low 80s. New Orleans are going to get the rain. Houston, you're probably not. And currently the forecast this weekend in Houston calls for temperatures in the mid 90s, but it would not at all surprise me if some of you jump to the upper 90s to near 100, and then in the wake of the storm, you'll certainly be there. But that may start a little bit early for those really warm temperatures, because you're on that west side where there's going to be that sinking air, and there's going to be even a higher pressure than you may otherwise have had. And then you go into New Orleans. New Orleans is going to be a lot of rain, a lot of wind, a long duration wind event with all that rain means power outage problems. Look at the totals here, 5, 6, 7 inches of rain from the New Orleans region to Biloxi. Now again, Biloxi and eastbound, not in the cone, but you are in the rain. So that is something to keep in mind as well. So let's break down that threat that Cristobal poses for the Gulf Coast, starting with the area from Houston to New Orleans. Cities along the Texas coast urging residents to prepare now. There's a state of emergency in effect across Louisiana. New Orleans closing some of its river gates and making sure that the city's drainage system is ready to handle the rain and possible storm surge. Now, we know that New Orleans is such a vulnerable spot as well. We want to go now to Biloxi, because I mentioned Biloxi with regards to how much water, how much rain could happen. There's also a storm surge threat there. Meteorologist Felicia Combs was there earlier today checking on the preparations.
I'm meteorologist Felicia Combs coming to you from Biloxi, Mississippi, specifically in the small craft harbor in Biloxi, actually the oldest harbor in the city. What you see behind me here, those are shrimping boats and fishing boats, and this weekend was supposed to be a very big deal for those boats. It was supposed to be the blessing of the fleet, but that has been postponed right now until next weekend. That officially marks kind of the beginning, the kickoff of shrimping season, but as you'll notice, that's not what we're seeing at all. We're not seeing boats kicking off. We're seeing boats tied down here in the harbor, and as they should be, as now this area is under a tropical storm warning and storm surge warning. Biloxi, in case you don't know, kind of surrounded on three sides by water. We've got the Bay of Biloxi, and then we've also got the Gulf of Mexico just past this barrier island that you see here, and that is going to be one of the things that we have to deal with in terms of the possibility for storm surge. Now, Biloxi, absolutely no stranger to flooding. In fact, Hurricane Barry took nearly the same path that's predicted for Cristobal last year and brought quite a bit of flooding to this area. Now, we are going to be on the east side of the storm, and this storm has been a heavily easterly loaded storm. So while Biloxi not in the cone, still going to be feeling those impacts. This is going to be a big rain maker for the Biloxi area and also a big storm surge maker, especially for those low-lying flood-prone parts of the city. So while the weather has been absolutely beautiful for our Friday, changes are coming. I do expect the weather here to begin deteriorating as we head into Saturday night, and then the worst of it will be Sunday and into Sunday night as the storm is approaching. We are going to have that possibility for some tropical storm force winds, but again, the big issues with Cristobal here are going to be the storm surge, inundation possible, and the heavy flooding rains. Back to you.
Yeah, I mean, 7 inches of rain goes a long way. That's Felicia reporting for us from the Biloxi area. And so, Carl, we've got all of the impacts from an upcoming tropical system, and I think people focus so much on that center path and that path of the cone. In years past, when the errors were so large, I think the cone actually did encompass a lot of the impacts. But now that the forecast has gotten better, most of the impacts are actually outside that cone.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say over the years, well, I'm in the cone or I'm not in the cone, and use that as a sort of barometer for what their level of threat was. And this is a prime example of why that's not a really good measuring stick. Take a look at where the cone is right now, and we'll show you that in just a moment. I want to take a look at Tampa, and it is a nice night right now. It's 75 degrees, not too bad at all. We expect to see a lot of wet weather coming up this weekend, probably about 1 or 2 inches of rain in total. Might be a little bit more than that from time to time, and some stronger thunderstorms, but the heaviest of rain is going to be farther north, more towards Lake City and Tallahassee and along that I-10 corridor. So here is that cone that we talk about, and then I want you to see where the rainfall is going to be relative to that cone. Some of it's in the cone, but most of it is not. There's going to be a huge area of heavy rain that is outside of the cone, especially southern Mississippi, and then right across the I-10 corridor, points farther south and into northern Florida. And let's talk a little bit more about northern Florida. Probably about 4 to 5 inches, Pensacola and Sandestin, in those areas. It is going to be a washout of a weekend. Same story around Tallahassee, about 4 inches, we'll say there, maybe 3 to 4 in Lake City, and about 4 to 5 in Apalachicola. And you want to keep in mind, this is one of those areas where we're going to see that big onshore push of water, and you've got that concave nature to the coastline. So we've got a storm surge threat of 2 to 4 feet in that Big Bend area. At the same time, very heavy rain is going to be coming down, and the water is going to be trying to run back out and into the ocean. It's going to have a hard time doing that with the onshore push of water. So that's going to increase the chances of seeing coastal flooding in these areas. There's going to be a really significant threat for storm surge and coastal flooding in these areas because you've got the water coming from two sides, coming from the ocean and also coming from inland areas. Also want to show you the high tide cycle here. That's an important part of this. We're talking about high tide coming in tomorrow morning as well as into Sunday morning. And so those are going to be the critical times, and particularly Sunday morning, because that's where we're going to see that maximum push of onshore flow. We'll have much more on this dangerous storm coming up in just a few minutes right here on the Weather Channel.
Frito-Lay Variety Pack. Days start with the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 78 degrees under fair skies. Tonight, some passing clouds. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, intervals of clouds and sunshine. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
Talk about some squally weather coming through Cancun, Mexico. Yucatan Peninsula really got hit hard. Depending on where you were exactly in the Yucatan, you had basically 48 hours of really bad rains. Cancun itself, all the way at the tip of the Yucatan, was more just these afternoon squalls of thunderstorms with all this wind. Yes, it's tied to the circulation with Cristobal, but not near the center of Cristobal at all. And that's kind of a hint of what might still be to come for those of you with U.S. interest, because this thing's headed north towards us. It is not going to have the worst of the impacts near the center necessarily. It's the east side that's going to be heavily loaded. The bulk of the rain and the thunderstorm activity are here on that east side of the storm. Florida already seeing showers and thunderstorms just off your west coast, and with this moving north, expect that tropical moisture feed to continue to go north towards Florida, towards Alabama, towards Mississippi. And yeah, Louisiana, we're looking at you, because with that north movement, as of the latest advisory, moving north at 14, the center is going to come towards Louisiana. But that's not where all the impacts will go. So you'll hear us repeat this a couple more times just to try to get that to sink in, that it's not just a forecast of the center that matters. It's where all the impacts go. Right now, again, you see all those thunderstorms on that northeast side. Important to keep in mind, overnight is actually a pretty important time in the tropics. While you think about storms kind of fizzling out on land overnight, you obviously see a big blow up of thunderstorm action in the overnight hours. And so this might be the beginning of that. You see this cluster that's coming across the north edge. We'll see if this can hold on. If that little next surge of thunderstorm action can stay near the center, that'll be yet another sign of some organization and some strengthening. There has been some strengthening today, 45-mile-per-hour top wind speed now, as seen by the NOAA aircraft and the Air Force hurricane hunters that have been surveying the storm. They helped confirm that 45-mile-per-hour wind. Remember, back before the first landfall in Mexico, it was 60-mile-per-hour winds, and that is the forecast again. Right here, Sunday morning, forecast to be a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm somewhere off that northern Gulf of Mexico coastline. Sunday evening, interacting with land, forecast of the winds comes down to 50, and then that core does go through the rest of Louisiana, north towards Little Rock. Where that center goes does matter. There's going to be a core of tropical moisture, heavier rains. The Mississippi River to the north there, still in flood stage, and so that matters. Extra rainfall coming in because of that. Tornado threat because of the extra spin. So all these things do come into play with regards to where the center goes, but but not all the impacts stay right near the center. The worst of the winds, anywhere from, say, the western Florida Panhandle back through Mobile Bay to Gulfport, Mississippi, to Biloxi, New Orleans, Grand Isle, all in tropical storm warnings, meaning tropical storm force winds are anticipated within the next 24 hours or so. You got to rush those preparations to completion. Make sure you know where the batteries are. Make sure you know where some food is that doesn't need power in case the power goes out, but also you got to know where the water rise is going to go, and the shape of the coast matters so much. You get all this wind pushing that water towards the bowl there from southeast Louisiana towards Mississippi. That holds the water in, so an easier time to get a water rise there. But it's a big system, so it's going to be moving the Gulf of Mexico waters on the east side of the Gulf of Mexico also. So a storm surge watch, Apalachicola to Cedar Key and around the Big Bend, you could have the water rise considerably there also. Where the rains really start coming down, we could have flooding. Flood watches over southeast Louisiana, around Lake Pontchartrain, Biloxi, Gulfport. I keep calling out those same areas. That's where we could see this corridor right in here of, let's say, 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 inches of rain. Combine that with some river flooding. The rivers can't exit towards the Gulf as easily because you have that onshore flow. So you'll have that chance for some flooding because of that, and at least some wave action. So some coastal flooding is a potential also around Lake Pontchartrain, back towards Mobile Bay. These are, areas that are more susceptible to that very thing when you have a wind direction like is forecast here. Carl, I think power outages are going to be underestimated on this one. It's only going to be a tropical storm, but enough wind and enough rain will knock down the trees for sure.
Yeah, a long duration wind event and plenty of very heavy rain to soften up the soil and loosen up those tree systems, the root systems there. So we certainly could be looking at significant power outages. And I wanted to show you the model forecast to show you exactly how this is going to play out. There may be some variation here, but this is the thrust of it. This is basically how it's going to be. And the models have been pretty consistent over the last couple of days. So here we go into Saturday evening, and we're starting to see the weather really coming on shore. We're starting to see the winds picking up. These bands of rain are beginning to move into southern Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, starting to get up into northwest Florida as well. You see that weather well away from the center. I mean, hundreds of miles away from the center across and into northern Florida. There we go into Sunday morning, and at this time, we're really starting to see a much stronger push of wind and waves and water. We're going to be looking at a high tide around the middle of the morning on Sunday morning, and you've got this maximum onshore push right at that time. So that's going to be a really critical period Sunday morning there in southeast Louisiana, southern parts of Mississippi in particular, and also in the Big Bend area of Florida, as Mark mentioned. Then the storm continues to push in. Sunday evening, we've got very heavy rain coming down. We're still looking at an onshore flow around Biloxi and over towards Mobile. And then it continues to push up into the lower Mississippi Valley. By the time we move into Monday morning, we've still got an onshore flow. We've still got strong winds. So because it is a large system, it's going to be a long duration event. Even though it's not the most intense system in the world, it's going to be quite a beating because it's going to go on for quite some time. And we're going to have much more on this dangerous storm coming up in just a few minutes right here on the Weather Channel.
Subaru.
Well, parts of Mexico still struggling with wind and rain and more from Cristobal. More than 2 feet of rain in some portions of northern Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula. Brought people out of their homes. There were some evacuations occurring, and there is still some more rain across that area right now. I want to welcome everyone back in as we are tracking Cristobal live tonight. This tropical storm gaining strength as it moves through that Gulf of Mexico and heading north on a path towards the U.S. Gulf Coast. Now, people are getting ready, and that is important. From the coast to parts of portions inland, people in southern Louisiana are preparing, including boaters on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain.
Well, here on Lake Pontchartrain, we're heavily influenced by the tides. This is a tidal basin, and when we get storms approaching from the east, it pushes water up into the lake. And as that happens, that prevents the water trying to get into the lake from getting out of the lake. So therefore, we have localized flooding.
So that's a good reason why there are flood advisories, storm surge warnings up in those areas. Let's go into the latest details, the kind of the nitty-gritty, so you know what to expect with this storm. We're going to go into the lab where storm specialist Carl Parker is standing by. Carl.
Well, Mark, it looks like we're going to be dealing with a tropical storm. It's one that's very large, and for that reason, the impacts are going to be felt far and wide, anywhere from Louisiana all the way across into Florida. Huge area being impacted by rain and wind and surge over the next few days here as this large storm slowly moves along to the north. Right now, a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm. We got a new advisory at 10 p.m. Central, and so it's up just a little bit in terms of intensity, and that's basically what we've been expecting all along. When you've got a really large system, and especially one that's being impacted by some things, including dry air on the west side, you see the absence of clouds on the west side of the circulation. When you've got a really large system that's got some things that are bothering it, then it's going to take a little time for it to get stronger, and it's basically going to run out of time as it comes in on Sunday. We can't completely rule out it getting to hurricane intensity, but at this point, all the model guidance has been very consistent, and again, because of those factors that I mentioned, it looks like we are most likely going to be dealing with a tropical storm. But keep in mind, because it is so large, this cone is only showing you where the center is likely to go. And the reason why the cone expands over time is because the average forecast error also increases over time. That's the reason why the circles essentially are getting bigger along those points. But we're going to be looking at impacts that are well out to the east, hundreds of miles out to the east relative to that cone, including a lot of very heavy rain. You can actually see that really clearly in the satellite imagery. So here's the center of circulation right in there. I mean, you're talking about 300, 400, 500 miles out to the east here where you've got all kinds of weather, which will be affecting much of Florida through the weekend. A lot of heavy rain, especially from, say, Lake City into Tallahassee, into Pensacola, into Mobile, and then over into Biloxi and New Orleans. 3 to 5 inches in the areas in yellow, but as much as 5 to 8 in the areas in orange. And as we just heard there at the top of the segment, as we're seeing a big onshore push of water, the water is also simultaneously going to be trying to run back out into the ocean as we get very heavy rain inland, and that is only going to add to that coastal flood threat. So it's going to be very serious, we think, across a lot of the region, and just a huge area of strong winds moving up and along the coast. And that means a very real probability of a storm surge there across the northern Gulf Coast, in addition to the wind threat and the heavy rain threat. And meteorologist Mike Seidel has the latest from Grand Isle, Louisiana.
We're still about 2 days away from a landfall of Tropical Storm Cristobal. It's now back in the Gulf of Mexico. It's steaming this way, and we expect a landfall sometime Sunday evening or Sunday night, and it could be right here in Grand Isle. This is a barrier island about 2 hours south of New Orleans. No stranger to tropical activity. In fact, on average, about every 2.3 years, they get a brush by from either a hurricane or a tropical storm, and a direct hit from a hurricane about every 6.2 years. So they're used to this stuff. Meanwhile, the surf gradually rolling in. High tides, by the way, Sunday, late morning, late evening. That's a key, the timing of the landfall. And we'll start to see the swell arrive, the waves out ahead of the system tomorrow and tomorrow night. And by Sunday, we could be looking at 15 to 20 footers. Storm surge values predicted here 2 to 4 feet. And there's a tropical storm warning up, of course, for here and also the city of New Orleans. So the major impacts rolling in beginning tomorrow night and certainly through Sunday night and even Monday morning. Leftover rain and a strong south wind. Because of that, there was a mandatory evacuation for Grand Isle. That kicks in at 6 a.m. on Saturday morning.
All right, Mike, thanks very much. And again, we're talking about an enormous area of weather that's going to affect areas from Louisiana all the way into Florida. In Grand Isle, Louisiana, very strong winds getting stronger by the hour during the day tomorrow.
With my hepatitis C, I felt I could.
The CPRA, working with the Corps of Engineers and all of our levee districts and local governments, are monitoring 689 gates across coastal Louisiana, including those along the river. Since Wednesday, another 44 gates have been closed, bringing the total of closed gates to 201. They are coordinating with Slipva East and Slipva West, Plaquemines Parish, Grand Isle, Lafitte on their floodgate closures in the greater New Orleans area. And we are pre-positioning flood fighting assets, super sacks, and sandbags in low-lying areas vulnerable to flooding. It is not too late to get a game plan. So I'm encouraging people, if they haven't done so, to get a game plan. You can go to getagameplan.org.
So they are preparing across Louisiana. We've been seeing those kind of press conferences and updates for residents there for the past couple of days. And that trend is going to continue because, let's face it, we've got a tropical storm that's headed towards Louisiana. Here's some of the latest information for you. 45-mile-per-hour top wind speed. That's ticked up a bit from earlier today. Moving north at 14 miles per hour. That's ticked up a little bit from earlier today, but that motion is still the same. 440 miles or so from the mouth of the Mississippi River. Right now, all of the thunderstorm action remains on the east side. There's been a little flare-up of action near the center to the north just a bit. We'll see if that's a fleeting flare-up of shower and thunderstorm activity or if that has some staying power through the night. As for where we go from here, look at the forecast. Going north and shifting west just a little bit, but still a strong tropical storm is in the mix. 60-mile-per-hour winds by Sunday morning and still tangling with those stronger winds even after interacting with land later on Sunday. That core then goes up through Arkansas, and then continuing up through the Midwest by Monday into Tuesday, and that core will bring some heavier rain. It'll bring some spin and a tornado threat, even well inland. Remember, the tropical storm warnings go well outside that cone. The cone is only for where the center goes. The wind will be in Gulfport, it'll be in Mobile, it'll be in Pensacola. The heavy rain then continues well east from there, going all the way through the Florida Panhandle and North Florida with potentially flooding rains. It's an east-loaded storm system. It's not just about where the center goes. The wind will also bring up the water. Storm surge warnings are in place across southeast Louisiana into portions of Mississippi. Storm surge watches as far away as the Florida Big Bend, so well away from the center. I got a question just a second ago on Twitter from @GeraldLloyd asking about the full moon and how that will impact that water rise and how much surge will be there. And the full moon does have an effect. Even now, we're seeing some areas that have 2.5 feet of water on top of the normally dry ground, higher than where you would anticipate water being at this point. That is partially because we're already seeing an onshore flow, but more than that, it's because of that full moon. The full moon's tonight, so the moon is going to have an impact here. Here's a look at the Grand Isle tide cycle, and this Sunday morning high tide is going to be a crucial one. Onshore flow just a couple of days past the full moon, so a higher high tide than it otherwise would be, and then you've got all the impacts from the storm as well. So great question there. You can think about adding another foot or two on top of the flood forecast than, say, if this were at a new moon and not at a full moon. So that does play a role. It does that is in the forecast. It's kind of baked in, and so it's something to keep in mind. Those numbers do account for where the, basically the tide should be, considering where the moon is right now. Based on the current forecast track, New Orleans is in that swath. No sign of tropical trouble here yet, but it is that calm before the storm. And now is the time to make sure you're prepared for any damaging winds, flooding, and power outages as the Louisiana coast is under that tropical storm warning, the storm surge warning, and the flood watch through the weekend. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 shined the light on how devastating a tropical system can be for New Orleans. The city has made drastic improvements to its levee system since Katrina, but the question is always, is it enough for the next storm?
New Orleans sits close to the hurricane-prone Gulf, surrounded by water and dissected by canals. And worse, much of the city sits below sea level. New Orleans is built in a bowl. Once water comes into the city, it has nowhere to go, trapping residents and making evacuation almost impossible. That can lead to a large loss of life. The Army Corps of Engineers has implemented a risk reduction system, but it is not a risk elimination system. During Katrina, storm surge rushed into the city when flood walls failed, drowning the lower 9th Ward with water up to roofs. Today, it would be different. These walls should stand, but a strong hurricane coming at just the wrong angle can produce storm surge even higher than these massive walls. Water would pour into the city even without a levee failure, and the calculation is a wrong Category 2 hurricane could be enough to do it. As neighborhoods like the lower 9th Ward rebuild behind the flood walls, there's a new and surprising worry. Officials' biggest concern is complacency. The city hasn't seen a large storm since Katrina, and they are worried people will find reasons not to listen to evacuation orders. Residents need to evacuate, but evacuating isn't easy in the Big Easy. One estimate is that it could take 44 hours to get everybody out of New Orleans and to clear the roads.
So if there are evacuations ordered, make sure you listen to them. We're not anticipating a lot of them in New Orleans, but we are anticipating some nasty weather. The rain and the wind really increasing through the weekend, lingering into Monday, if not Monday night, and then back to your typical pop-up storm regime by Tuesday. Even at this hour, we're still getting some new updates in from the National Weather Service offices. Look how much further inland the tropical storm warnings have been extended. Now north of Lake Pontchartrain all the way west to Baton Rouge, as that forecast of the center is getting more certain and the timeline is getting shorter, more areas will be put under those tropical storm conditions. Here's a look at how the European model sees that playing out. Here's our weekend, rain arriving sometime Saturday, really picking up on Sunday. The worst of the rain and the wind go through the southeast Louisiana and Mississippi early Sunday night, but even into Monday, we could have quite the core of rain, especially on that east side of the storm system. So that is something that we'll watch, and we'll continue to follow that inland flooding, inland tornado threat will continue into Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll be right back.
As a struggling actor, I need
Earth, next Sunday night on the Weather Channel.
Currently in our area, 78 degrees under mostly cloudy skies. Tonight, some passing clouds. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible. Low 69. Saturday, intervals of clouds and sunshine. High 90. Winds west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Saturday night, partly cloudy. Low 72. Winds west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Here's our 7-day outlook.
All right, some amazing video from Cancun, Mexico of our tropical storm, or more specifically, thunderstorms within this tropical storm. A couple of things to note about this. One is turn your camera sideways. I don't know why people shoot vertical video. We want to see more of what's going on. The other is that it was probably not anything like this for the better part of the day there in Cancun. What happens with a big tropical system is you've got stronger winds aloft, and so when bands of thunderstorms come through, what they do is they tap into that stronger wind aloft, and so for a period of time, as the storms are coming through, it looks pretty bad, but then things improve as the storms move out. So you have these sort of bouts of heavier rain. That's the thing you watch for when you've got a tropical storm moving in. You watch for the bands of rain because you know when they come in, that's when you're going to be seeing the stronger winds moving in as well. You know, one of the most deadly parts of a tropical storm or hurricane is not the wind, it's the storm surge. And hurricane expert Dr. Rick Nebb joins us with a look at what kinds of surge we can expect from this storm.
It has been a very long week in southern Mexico and Central America. Flooding rains that have turned deadly, and now large tropical storm Cristobal is going to make its move across the Gulf of Mexico this weekend, bringing to our coastline and to inland areas a number of wind and especially water impacts. One of them is storm surge. It's saltwater flooding coming onto normally dry ground. One of the reasons we're so vulnerable in the Gulf of Mexico is the shape of the coastline. I mean, look at that concave shape that allows it to behave kind of like a catcher's mitt and captures the water that is pushed northward on the east side of the storm. But even more than that, we have this very wide continental shelf. The distance between the beach and when it finally starts getting deep is very wide. And so when the water is pushed toward the coastline, it's more apt to continue on and go on to normally dry ground. A more narrow continental shelf, we'd be seeing more breaking waves at the coastline. So we're very vulnerable throughout the entire Gulf of Mexico to storm surge. Now, you throw a large tropical storm into the mix, you don't even need a hurricane to produce life-threatening saltwater flooding. Watch how large this system is going to be, and it's going to be lopsided with most of the winds and the water on the east side. Look at that distance between the center of circulation and the west coast of Florida. It's going to be this expansive wind field, a long fetch, pushing the salt water northward into the north central and northeastern Gulf of Mexico. A lot of big waves out in the Gulf, large swells propagating northward, and then when the system gets close to landfall, if the onshore push is timed with high tide, that's when we could have a maximum in storm surge flooding that could exceed that roughly 3-foot threshold where it's life-threatening. Now, because of the large size of the system, we're going to see persistent onshore flow that could create some amount of saltwater flooding all the way from Louisiana down to the southwest coast of Florida. But the areas that we're most concerned about would be southeast Louisiana and portions of the Mississippi coastline and that oh so vulnerable Big Bend area of Florida where the waters are so shallow and it just catches the water with the shape of that coastline. Now, what do you do in the face of these storm surge and coastal flooding hazards? You get out when local officials tell you to go.
Or as we say, run from the water and hide from the wind. And in this case, there's not going to be a terrific amount of wind, but it is going to be a long duration event. The wind really starts coming in tomorrow, picks up through the evening, goes through the day on Sunday, and then even into Monday along the Gulf Coast there because this is such a large system. Now, we did get a new advisory about an hour ago, now a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm, so up just a notch from 40 miles per hour. Slow strengthening is exactly what we're expecting out of the system because it is very large. When you've got a big sprawling system like this, they tend to intensify very slowly and also weaken very slowly. When they're smaller, they can ramp up really quickly and they can also dissipate very quickly. So in this case, because it's very large, because there's also a lot of dry air, you see the absence of cloud on the west side of the circulation, because of all these different things, it is likely going to be a tropical storm as it comes in on Sunday. There is some chance that it gets a little bit stronger. We don't want to rule that out. You never want to say never in tropical weather, but at this point, most of the evidence is pointing towards a strong tropical storm. But again, a really large one, and for that reason, a lot of impacts affecting a wide area over the next few days here. There you see the center of circulation. The cone is showing you where the center of circulation is going to go, and that is most likely going to be Louisiana, coming in as perhaps a 60-mile-per-hour tropical storm, maybe a little bit stronger than that. And then here you see the center that is now just north of the Yucatan and Mexico, but then all of that weather that is well away from that center, a good 500 miles away from that center. So this is what we mean by a very, very large storm. And I want to show you the model forecast to show you how all this is probably going to play out. We go into the middle of the day on Sunday. We're really starting to see this thing come in. So conditions going downhill during the day tomorrow. Some pretty strong winds by late tomorrow in Louisiana and Mississippi and into Alabama and Northwest Florida. But here we see this maximum push of onshore flow coinciding with the high tide there in southeast Louisiana and southern Mississippi on Sunday morning. So that is really going to be the one to watch out for when we're seeing that maximum feed of wind coming onshore and also a big push of water as well and very heavy rain, which is going to add to that coastal flood threat. So a lot of threats here. We're going to be with you all weekend long covering this very dangerous storm. We're going to have more on this coming up in just a few minutes.